and yeah, people keep coming in. But welcome to this lunch conversation. I'm not quite sure how the original the lunch conversation is. This is a seminar, but feel free to take some light lunch. It's not proper lunch, but yeah, feel free to take that. And yeah, thank you for joining us from online community. So that's really nice to see you here. Well, today we are privileged to have a well-known speaker, particularly on the Orthodox Christianity. So I would like to introduce Dr. Cyril Hovran. In the web pages we circulated, you will see the long list of his books and so on. So I wouldn't go through all the details. But Dr. Hovran is a professor at the University College Stockholm and also director of Huffington Ecumenical Institute and Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. So we are, in a sense, neighbors. Yeah. So yeah, it's great to have you here. And of course, he has lots of publications. I just brought two books here. Eastern Christianity in its Texts. Quite a thorough researched book. It's unreadable, so I don't advise you to read it. Okay. And then the shorter one. This is readable. Political Orthodoxies. So this is more manageable. Yeah. Okay. So without taking more time, I'd like to invite Dr. Hovran. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It's really a privilege and an honor for me to be here. I should say that since quite recently I've started teaching in the educational environment which is evangelical. I'm even employed now by an evangelical seminary in Ukraine. That is the only place of my employment in Ukraine. Even though I taught in different Orthodox institutions like a Theological Academy, seminaries, and so forth, I don't do it anymore. I do it only for the evangelical seminary, which is the Ukrainian evangelical seminary based in Kiev. And when I told them, I just had a lecture for them a couple of days ago. And when I told them that I would teach here at Fuller's, they were thrilled. They were just absolutely fascinated because Fuller is a myth. It's a legend, of course. And I'm very happy to be a part of this legend. So indeed, even though my original training was more in systematic theology and patristics, but the events pushed me to the field of political/public theology, and that's what I do mostly now. Well, rather unfortunately for me, because it's not exactly what I'd like to do, but I have to. I like to do like patristics, reading old ancient texts, and doing this hermeneutics. But now we need to do the hermeneutics of the events, of the current events, I'd like to summarize for you what I usually teach when it comes to the Orthodox political theology. I'd like to stress two aspects, two notions that are pertinent to political theology. The notion of political theology per se, and the notion of public theology as different from political theology. I usually explain, there are different explanations of what is the difference and what is the commonality between political and public theology. I prefer the one that you see on your screen, using a triangle with the church, the state, and the society being together, being the angles of the triangle, being connected somehow with one another. And basically, I would argue that speaking roughly, even though some people would disagree, but speaking roughly, political theology is something which is pertinent to the church-state relations, historically so. If we consider that, for example, Augustine is the father of the Christian political theology, and some people believe he is, at least in the West, then Augustine certainly didn't know what is a society, what is this phenomenon. He knew what is the church, he knew what is the state, and he explained this interaction between the church and the state, especially in his De Civitate Dei, his famous kind of treatise, which is probably the beginning of the Christian political theology. I would argue, of course, that the political theology goes a bit further back to the persons like Eusebius and Eusebius of Caesarea, and his treatises about Constantine, for example, his praises of Constantine, his Vita Constantini, are also founding texts for the Christian political theology. And essentially, it proves the point that I sometimes bring, that, well, in the West, they usually copied what they invented in the East. In the East, essentially, this political theology was invented through the works of the theologians like Eusebius, and then copied by the theologians like Augustine. Anyways, political theology was originally known from the beginning as something which is pertinent to the church-state relations, and only with the emergence of the society, when the society, it doesn't mean that the society did not exist before it was described. It means that people started reflecting on society as different from the state only in the modernity, only in our time. Sometimes Hegel is credited for this differentiation between the church and the society, even though Hegel was an etatist himself. He believed in the state much more than he believed in the society, but at least he guided us to perceive society as something distinct from the state. And after the society became really a major player in the modern public square, as it were, then a particular kind of theology emerged, which we now call public theology, which focuses on the relationship between the church and the society. So I mentioned that, well, we can argue whether Eusebius or Augustine are the fathers of the Christian political theology, but certainly the father of the modern Christian political theology is a guy whose name was Carl Schmitt, and who lived in the, well, he lived a long life actually, from the late 19th century through the 80s of this century. He was a Catholic amateur theologian. He was not a professional theologian. Professionally, he was a lawyer. He was a scholar of the Roman law. And we could say that by reading Augustine, who was fundamental for him, and by reading some other authors whom Augustine quoted, because Augustine, when he spoke about political theology, he quoted, for example, the Roman philosopher Varro, who lived in the 1st century BC, whose work has not survived, but Augustine has preserved some quotes. Basically, Schmitt might have received these hints from Augustine and Varro in describing his own political theology, which he described in his essay, which was published in 1922 as Politische Theologie, political theology book. It became fundamental. It became important for Germany at the time, and it was used later on, 11 years later, when Hitler came to power, to justify why he needs to override law. Hitler, when he was elevated to power, he faced the restrictions, on the one hand from the Weimar Constitution in Germany, on the other hand from the presidential office in the same republic. He was a chancellor, and he felt that he is kind of suffocated by those restrictions, and he decided to go beyond, to override the law, which is quite similar to what some people feel about what is happening. Schmitt actually justified Hitler's strive for power, more power, unrestricted power. He argued that under the circumstances of emergency, a leader, Führer, can receive more power than it is envisaged by the legal system. And Schmitt actually used theology to justify this. Probably this is one of the reasons why Schmitt has become popular in the countries like Russia, like China, and now increasingly in the US I believe that people like J.D. Vance, I think, is one of the kind of those guys who read or heard about Schmidt, at least from their professors, like, for example, Paul Kahn at Yale Law School, who actually, by the way, Paul Kahn published a book in actually in 2011 by Princeton University Press, which is titled exactly as the book of Carl Schmitt. The only thing that Kahn added the word new pillars of the idea of sovereignty. Anyways, Schmitt was fundamental in shaping modern political theology, and yet Schmitt almost killed it because this political theology became compromised because of the Nazism. And after the World War II, people discussed whether to preserve political theology as a discipline or to kill it altogether, to get rid of it because it became so much compromised. Eventually, they decided, of course, to preserve it, and this work has been done by the theologians like Jürgen Moltmann, and before that by Karl Barth and Dietrich Bonhoeffer, of course, who are the fathers of the kind of modern political theology after Schmitt. But still, this theology was focused on the church-state relations mostly. The focus on the church-society relations became important, especially in the American setting. And I personally believe that the father of the modern public theology is MLK. He's not usually perceived as related to public theology. I firmly believe that he is. He's really a founding figure for the public theology. In addition to focusing on the church-state, on the church-society relations, public theology also tries to build bridges within and outside the divided society. That is the difference of public theology, for example, with the liberation theology. Liberation theology, I don't have much time to explain, and you probably know better than me what it is, but essentially it tries on the divisions. And sometimes it enhances the divisions. It takes sides, it takes parts in the divisions within the society, within the states, and so forth. Public theology tries to avoid taking sides, tries to really to overcome the divides and to bridge and to reach out. And that, I think, that was really the job that MLK did so well, and contributed to this development of public theology. Then let me use this triangle again to explain what is happening now. That was like the pretext of what I want to concentrate upon in the remaining time, which is the war in Ukraine, which is my topic. I believe that this differentiation between political and public theology can help us understand better what is going on in Ukraine, because this war in Ukraine is underpinned heavily by theology, well, by different sorts of theology. It's well, this war is compared to many things in the past. Some people compare it like to the World War II when it comes to the amount of destruction. And indeed, if you see how the cities are just eliminated to raise from the face of the earth, it's very much like World War II pictures, what we see in Ukraine. Some people say that it's very much like World War I because it's the war of the trenches. And really people sit in trenches and exchange fire, and there is like a stalemate, and they even use gas. I mean, something that didn't use very much in the World War II, but they use it very much in World War I. But I would say that the war in Ukraine is different from both world wars, World War I and World War II, because the first two world wars, well, you see, we now talk about the first ones, right? Meaning that there could be others. The first World War IIs, of them, they were really kind of secular. Yes, there were theologians who tried to explain, to justify, like there were German theologians, especially during the World War I, who explained that Germany has a mission, like it's a hammer of God, has a mission to liberate, this decadence West from its kind of decadence, from the liberal values and stuff. Nothing has changed since then. but basically, it was like the war when the ideologies clashed, the ideologies which were very secular constructs, and religion. Yes, the churches kind of played some role in justifying those wars. The churches often were complicit in those wars, but they were not protagonists in the wars. In this case, in the case of the Ukraine war, the church is the protagonist of the war. I sometimes say that in the World War II, for example, when the churches supported Nazi or fascists, like fascists in Italy, like Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox churches supported them. They were like the last wagon in the train. They were just somewhere in the rear of the train. In this war in Ukraine, the church is the locomotive of the war. It's really the driving force. It's really the engine of the war in the terms of ideas, in the terms of producing justifications and rationalizations for the war. And a sort of political theology, or some kinds of political theology, are behind these justifications. So political theology is like a fuel in this locomotive, in this leading in this engine that drives the entire train, ahead. And I would argue that a particular kind of political theology that evolved, that has been developed in Russia, in the Russian church, underpins this war. I know this from the first hand because I was a part of the Russian church. I really worked in the central administration of the Russian church. I saw how this ideology was emerging. I saw it like an embryo yet, and a puppy, not a monster yet. And then later on, it would grow up to a monster indeed. I believe I can speak, with some authority about this sort of theology, because I saw its evolution, all the stages of its evolution as well. And I could say that this theology is underpinned by a sort of the idea of symphonia, which is a Byzantine concept of the harmony and unity and privileged relationships between the church and the state, that was very natural for the Roman Empire, whether it was Christian or before that, but became, of course, irrelevant and obsolete with the emergence of modernity. Now it reemerges in Russia. It has reemerged in Russia, and actually people speak, not just, it's not just something that they want to happen intuitively. They understand they need symphonia. They speak about symphonia. Putin himself refers to symphonia, and that's something that really they consciously try to develop. This special privileged relationship between the church and the state. And it's interesting that I believe I observe, some residues or some ideas, some kind of elements of this symphonia thinking in this country. I had a chance in the beginning of February to be in DC and to attend the International Summit for Religious Freedom with J.D. Vance presenting his concept, the church-state relations. And, it was so clear for me, this is symphonia. That's when people speak about the freedom of religion, some of them, not all of them, when they spoke, they essentially meant symphonia. A privileged relationship between the church and the state. That is kind of the real thing behind this rhetoric of freedom of religion sometimes in this context. Anyways, in Russia, it is more dense. It is more kind of articulated, this idea of symphonia. And this idea of symphonia certainly underpins a sort of political theology which is evolving there. Which means that political theology in Russia focuses on the church-state relations. It ignores almost completely society, even though there is society in Russia. And actually, there are even policies of the Kremlin to kind of cultivate, to cherish a sort of society or civil society in Russia, but they want this civil society to be completely under control. Essentially, it's a fake civil society. It pretends to be a civil society. It even plays, by some rules of civil society, but it is completely, it's like really like a zombie. The they can move hands and legs, but there is no life inside because everything is controlled from outside. That's why society is not really a part of this of the discourse of political theology in Russia. In contrast to that, I believe in Ukraine, what we observe in Ukraine and what is emerging in Ukraine is really a very vibrant public theology, focusing exactly on the relationship between the church and the society. In Ukraine, society is super strong. It's really a kind of super society in terms, of Marvel's universe. It's really more powerful than the state, and still it is more powerful than the state. I will come back to this in a minute, but exactly the strength of the civil society in Ukraine, which is stronger than the state, makes the churches align themselves with the society more than with the state. And again, it's not just because the churches, like the society and this idea of civil society, is because this is the most powerful player, in the Ukraine public square, society. It's not the state. That's why it's even in the kind of pragmatic interests of the church to develop relations with the more powerful guy on the block, which is the civil society, than with the state, which helps in turn to the Ukraine public theology to evolve and to develop. But let me, after this very brief explanation, let me go a bit into detail when it comes to the Russian political theology. So it calls itself the Russian world ideology. That's how the Russians call themselves. What is their theology? It's the Russian world ideology. Its main protagonist, theologian, is Patriarch Kirill of Moscow, and it really works as a kind of quasi-religion. It's not religion per se, even though it uses religion. It uses a lot of religious symbols, but its core, as it were, it's very secular. It's a very secular phenomenon, which functions almost like religion, looks like religion, but it's not religion. It's very much like, a civil society in Russia. It looks like civil society. It moves like civil society, but it's a zombie, completely controlled from outside. It's completely staged, as it were. So this kind of religion, which is now promoted in Russia, is staged. Really, it's manipulated heavily. And I think the symbol of this staged religion is this church, which was built some time ago. Is the main church of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and it's scary. If you get inside, you get scared there, because the ambiance of the church, the architecture, even though it was built to demonstrate symbolically every aspect of the glorious Russian history, it is actually the amalgamation of making Russia great again, as it were, right? And but I mean, aesthetically, it's scary, it's unchurchly, it's very much contrary to the idea of religion per se. And as I said, Patriarch Kirill is very much the person behind this sort of religion. This picture is quite symbolic. This is Kirill to the left, and the cross from his hat, mitre. The shadow is on Putin's forehead, which is quite symbolically. Putin, in this kind of political theology and in this sort of quasi-religion, is a main figure, is the most sacred figure. And I'll show you an episode of how he is received in Greece. In Greece, there is a monastic republic called Mount Athos. It's really a sacred place. Well, it's very segregated, no women there, only men. It's a men's world, completely men's world. It's completely a kind of a monk's world. Only monks live there. And the Mount Athos, to a great extent, is almost like a relic of Byzantium, of these symphonies of the past. And that's why it's not coincidence that Putin was received as a new basileus, a Byzantine basileus there in this video. Okay, yeah. That's him meeting the monks of Mount Athos. And this is him inside the church, and you will see him now standing in the place where usually the kings were standing inside the church. Yeah, this is the place where the kind of traditionally the Byzantine basileus were placed, and he was put there. And the entire hermeneutics of his location, according to the narrators in the Russian news, was that look, he is the second coming of Byzantium, of the katechon, another notion from the Schmittian political theology, the one who holds the world in its entirety. So that's it. This is the image of the modern Russian symphony, as it were, which goes back, or at least pretends to go back to the Byzantine past. And this is another video that I wanted to share with you. It's a priest consecrating a monument to Joseph Stalin. Well, it is happening in the summertime after the Easter, and the priest uses the phrase Christ is risen, which is always used only in the Easter period. And he says that, well, nevertheless, he does this. He uses this phrase Christ is risen while consecrating this monument to Stalin, meaning that essentially not Christ is risen, Stalin is risen. You will see it now in the movie, in this video clip. You can hear it a bit. You see, like almost the icons of Stalin everywhere. So basically, his point is that, look, we know that Stalin killed almost all priests, which was true. And still we venerate him because, he said, because of Stalin, we have so many martyrs now. It's almost like you see, well, Christ was killed, but let us pray those who killed him, because without them, Christ would not be killed, Right. Basically, the same argumentation. So this is like a sort of a summary of the Russian political theology, which is based on the church-state relations, which is really uses heavily symbols and forms, aesthetical forms of architecture, of music, of liturgy, to focus exactly on the current political agenda, and to elevate Putin's figure as the key figure, like the central figure in this in this political theology. In contrast to that, let's go back to Ukraine. In the Ukrainian case, as I said, we have a sort of antithesis to the Russian political theology, and this antithesis I would identify as the Ukrainian public theology. It doesn't mean that the Ukrainian public theology ignores the state. It does take into consideration the state, but the Ukrainian public theology focuses mostly on the society as the main partner for the church. Yet in this partnership, I would say, in contrast even to some Western or even American cases of public theology, when the church, as it were, tries to develop a sort of symphony with the society. We could say that in the public theology, church seeks a sort of symphony, with the society instead of the state. But this sort of symphony sometimes leads almost to this dissolution of the church within the society. In Ukraine, we try to preserve the church as a kind of independent actor, a partner for the society, that the church does not lose itself in relationship with the society, but tries to develop really partnership with the society, to be a good partner, not to be a slave, not to be, not to subdue to the society, not to completely embark on the social agendas, but certainly to appreciate those agendas and really to kind of to make sense, theological sense of those agendas, sometimes to correct those agendas if needed. So the church really, or the churches in general, and this applies to all, I would say, confessions across Ukraine. It applies to the Orthodox, which is the majority, Catholics, and the Protestants, primarily evangelicals, because, well, the evangelicals constitute the majority of the Protestants in the US, in Ukraine. And I would say that the evolution of the Ukrainian public theology, which focuses on the society, which at the same time values the church as a kind of self-sufficient actor in the society, it goes back to our public upheavals, which we call Maidans. Maidan is, you remember this word because there were many publications of the Ukraine Maidans in 2014, when there was this public upheaval, resistance to the regime of Viktor Yanukovych in Ukraine. But it was not the first one, it was the last one, the latest one, the latest Maidan. Before that, there were some other Maidans. And Maidan literally means the square. And Maidan is the name of the main square in Kiev. This is it. Because people, the upheaval started in this main square of Kiev, people would come there to protest. All those revolutions were called as the Maidans. This is the latest one, what we call the European Maidan, and this is the picture which I took myself in Kiev. And you see, this is a banner. A building here was burned during the revolution. That's why they kind of shielded it with those sheets, and they wrote there, "Freedom is our religion," which is a kind of almost like a symbol of this Ukrainian public theology in a sense, well, which is valuable for the secular people in Ukraine, but also appreciated by religious people in Ukraine. And this is a picture from 2014, the latest upheaval that actually Putin was so much afraid of it that Putin was afraid that this movement of liberation, as it were, would cross the border, would go to Russia, and that's how he preventively started the incursion in Ukraine, annexing Crimea, and started the proxy war in Donbass. But this was, as I said, this was not the first one. The earlier one happened 2004. This is called like the Orange Revolution. Maidan. I also took those pictures. I was much younger then, 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago. And actually, there were chapels established, set on the Maidan. So it was also a religious phenomenon, not just a secular phenomenon. That's the difference between, for example, the social upheavals in Ukraine and in many other Western societies where there are upheavals in Ukraine. They were not secular, completely secular. They had a very clear religious kind of flavor and presence there, with the chapels, with especially during the Maidan 2014, people would kneel massively. All those thousands of people would kneel and would read Lord's Prayer together. So it was like probably one of the most massive prayer, in the recent history, with really like hundreds of thousands of people praying together, kneeling and praying together for the same cause. And these are the examples of the chapels. This is a chapel, actually, during the recent Maidan. So, during those Maidans, essentially the Ukrainian public theology was forged, received momenta to be articulated, to be reflected upon, and to produce a kind of public theology which is very different from the Russian political theology. Even though, we can understand the texts of each other, we read the same sources, but Ukrainians and Russians, we develop very different sorts of political theology. In Russia, it is a political theology which focuses on the state, which praises, the submission of an individual to the will of the leader of the state. In Ukraine, we just go in a completely opposite direction. Well, the Ukrainian public theology, as you can see in these conclusions, is based on the horizontal relations primarily. It really values the horizontal relations between the individuals. It really grows from the grassroots level. And the ideas of dignity and freedom are crucially important for this public theology. While for the Russian political theology, the vertical kind of power structures are super important. And it's kind of, they try to justify why hierarchy, the power structures are important theologically. That is kind of the main job of the political theologians in Russia. They try to make sense of those power structures and try to justify them. And of course, they try to downplay the ideas of freedom and dignity. So those are like the main. Of course, it's much more complicated, much more nuanced, but I'd like to just to bring to you this this scheme to explain how Ukraine and Russia are different theologically from the perspective of public/political theology in perceiving the same realities, and probably it will make more sense for you what we are standing for. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for your presentation. Sorry.
Sorry, could I just make a remark? We're having a technical difficulty at the moment, and I'm wondering whether anybody is on Zoom and also in the room.
Sorry.
Because Zoom seems to be blocked in the room for some reason, which is why Tyler's here. But so nobody can see the chat, and if there's any questions in the chat. So Sebastian, you'll need to ask people who are on Zoom to voice their questions.
Okay, so I'll say that. Yeah, so we have some difficulties. Can you hear us? Yeah, you can hear us. Yeah, okay. So if you can just speak out rather than putting into the chat. Yeah, yeah. So we cannot see the your whatever you put in the chat function. So you can just speak out. So any questions now? Yeah, we open to the questions. We got about 20 something minutes. So please feel free to raise questions. Yeah, we have it here.
Thank you so very much for a very informative presentation. I really, really appreciate it. I'm a second year PhD student studying under Dr. Sebastian in public theology. And so my first question is, because looking at your triangle, which I very much appreciated, it seems to be the commonality between public theology and political theology is the church, which I think is core. Do you think that there is ways for public theology and political theology to collaborate and to, maximize, that commonality? And secondly, as you were doing your presentation and you were describing the church in Russia, it made me think, the state church. Do you think it's kind of the same concept in China with the China church being not really a church, but only,
Excellent questions. Well, briefly, I'll try to respond briefly. Certainly there should be convergence between political and public theology, ideally, and not just ideally, it happens. But in Ukraine and Russia, because of the war, they became alienated. They became really polarized. I don't see, for now, much convergence between the two approaches just because of the war. It doesn't mean that it cannot happen. It should happen. It should be brought together under this, maybe, the umbrella of, I don't know, super political / public theology, whatever. We need to find a name for this kind of super discipline. And some people understand political theology broadly as encompassing both political and public theology in the narrow sense of the definitions. So it's very normal for them to work together in the normal situation. Well, at least you need peace to have this conversation. Speaking about China, it's a very interesting case because certainly there was a sort of symphony in China, in the imperial China before communism. If you take Confucian or even more Neo-Confucian ideas, they are basically symphonic ideas. It's about how religion should support, the state, and the state has, its heavenly mandate, and they are inseparable and even indistinguishable from one another, religion and the political system. That was the case in the imperial China. Now in the communist China, the situation changed. Even though I think the communist leaders in China, they still act as emperors in the sense that they try to secure, this heavenly mandate in order to preserve or to boost their legitimacy in the eyes of their subjects as well. They don't need religion anymore, really, to do that, because they use ideology primarily. And it's not really, it's Maoism, which is a kind of very special kind of, communist ideology. And ideology has substituted religion for the Chinese leaders. Yet, religion is permitted in some pockets in China. I personally go to China very often, to different places, and I go to, I met some people from the underground churches, and I went to the official churches. I went to this huge official seminary, Protestant seminary in Nanjing, which is completely supported by the communist state. And you can see there, by the way, this seminary in Nanjing that I saw, it is the largest seminary I ever saw. It's huge. It's a monster kind of complex with a huge chapel, buildings, for the faculty. Everything is provided by the state. Everything is paid by the state, but it is the state which is behind everything. It's like a monstrous kind of structure. To study theology, please study theology, but it should be under very tight control. So the state wants to control everything religious. At the same time, the state doesn't need religion. That's why we are not talking really about symphony in China. It may come, just like in Russia, because in the Soviet communist Russia, it was the same. The state did not need religion. The state just controlled religion in very tiny pockets, of society. And then religion reemerged in post-Soviet Russia as a partner of the state. And now the symphony became possible. In the Soviet Union, there was no symphony, basically, as there is no symphony in China. But it doesn't mean that symphony one day may not reoccur in China.
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have one question there, and then after this, Roman, please.
Спасибо большое, Kirill. Thank you so much for your presentation. As a Ukrainian who lived in Russia for a long time, I found your presentation to be very informative. Thank you. I have a question about so I'm first year PhD student in practical theology, and particularly interested in persecuted church. And one of the questions, I guess not questions, but one of the things that Russian propaganda says about the Ukraine is that says something about the closure of the Moscow Patriarchate churches in Ukraine. Is there a way to counter this propaganda? How do you respond to people that say that there is a persecution of a particular group of believers inside Ukraine? Thank you so much.
Yeah, good. It's also a good and a big question indeed, because sometimes also in the US, for example, the situation with the religious freedom in Ukraine is presented as the persecution against religion. For example, a famous or notorious advocate Robert Amsterdam, in his recent interview to Tucker Carlson, he presented the situation as that the Ukrainian state persecutes religion as such, similar to what happened in the Soviet time, which is of course a pure manipulation. Well, yes, we not just Ukraine, but many European countries now face this dilemma between the national security and religious freedom. It's a big issue, for example, in Estonia now. It's a big issue in Latvia and Lithuania. And it is a big issue in Ukraine. It's even bigger issue in Ukraine because, well, we now try to survive as, in this war. And because, unfortunately, the Russian Federation has instrumentalized the church as its instrument, as its weapon, basically, people want to neutralize these weapons and try to restrict some functionality of the church, which is believed to be still a part of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine, to restrict its functionality in Ukraine. It's a very debatable issue. I personally have my own reservation about how this issue is handled, but I would say that it's an unresolved issue. No one has come up with a formula how to balance, national security and religious freedom, especially under the circumstances of the war, of the ongoing war. I don't think that the solutions provided by the Ukrainian government are ideal in this situation. There are some mistakes, in my personal opinion. But, well, of course, they are not as grave as they are presented, as people say that it is like a persecution against religion now, or a persecution against a particular church. This particular church is deprived of some of its images, of some of its privileges that it had. For example, some sort of like they have to pay for their facilities, like gas and water, the same price as the rest. And they believe that this is a persecution. So it's up to you to decide if it is or it's not.
Thank you. Amish, next.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I can resonate with the situation in India, with the regime in Russia and so on.
Sorry, can people hear? Can people hear over there? I mean, online people.
Maybe
Can they hear?
Maybe go in front.
Maybe.
Yes,
Can they hear? Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so my question was in relation to civil society being strong or weak. I can see the Indian civil society becoming weaker. There's no, spontaneous large-scale protest emerging, which used to be the case before the current regime. So you mentioned Ukraine as a stronger, has a stronger civil society, and I see even South Korea to some extent is a very strong civil society. So
indeed,
can you comment on two to three different things that the church did in order to impact a stronger civil society comparing to other societies in the world?
Yeah, thank you for this question again. Indeed, well, I believe in Ukraine, as a matter of fact, the churches did not contribute very much to strengthening the civil society. It came up on its own. But then the church, and they should be credited for that, they understood very early that this is the partner to deal with. It's not the state. And the churches kind of embraced the values of the civil society and endorsed the upheavals and started developing a sort of theology, public theology, to explain why civil society matters. So the church played a passive role in shaping the civil society, but at least they accepted civil society, which is already kind of a big deal, already important. And I just want to say about the civil society in Ukraine that it's very strong. It's stronger than any power. It's stronger than Zelensky, for example. That's something that they don't understand in the White House, because they think that if we replace Zelensky, Ukraine will surrender, will change. They don't understand Ukraine because if they replace Zelensky, the society will be still there. The society will bring up another kind of guy who will represent the interests of the society. And there's something that the White House cannot change, or Putin. Actually, it's Putin who wants to make this change, and he uses as his proxy the Oval Office. But they don't understand that in Ukraine, the change of presidency doesn't mean anything. The change of presidency should occur, certainly, and it does occur, but it will not change the attitude of the society, because the society elects. I mean, the people elect the president. They want the president to be accountable. That's why even Zelensky, even if Zelensky have considered, say, changing his policies, giving up to Putin, he understands the moment he articulates this, he will be just thrown away from the wind. There will be defenestration of Zelensky,
Right. Thank you. Any questions from the online participants? Okay.
Louisa has one.
Okay. So sorry. Yeah. Right. Louisa. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you so much for that presentation. Fascinating differentiation between political theology and public theology to explain how Russians and Ukrainians view the conflict. I'm just wondering, in Ukraine, what is the role of the Orthodox Church, and does the Orthodox Church view church and society the same way as the Ukrainians in general, or are they more closely aligned to the Russian Orthodox Church?
Right. Yes. Thank you. Well, the Orthodox Church constitutes the majority in Ukraine. It's mostly an Orthodox country, but again, it's more like on the level of identity. An Orthodox country. It's not so much on the level in the sense of church going, and it is. If we use the sociological concept, there is like a way used in sociology of religion to explain the religiosity of the society. They differentiate between three modalities: belonging, behaving, and believing. So in these modalities, Ukraine is more about belonging as an identity than behaving or believing. So most people identify themselves as Orthodox. Even more people identify themselves as Orthodox in Russia than they go to the church. The Orthodox churches, they try to articulate some ideas pertinent to the public theology. Well, I'm an Orthodox, and I've been credited for kind of setting up this sort of Ukraine public theology. I published a book very early about Ukraine public theology, and I still advocate. As you can see, I'm very passionate about advocating for Ukraine public theology because I'm pretty much behind it somehow. But I follow with great appreciation. I see how public theology is becoming appreciated and developed further in other confessional groups. I would say that the Greek Catholics, who are also a visible kind of minority in Ukraine, which is a part of the Catholic Church, of course, but they use the Catholic social doctrine to contextualize it and to develop the Ukrainian public theology on the premises of the social doctrine of the Catholic Church, which is very helpful. And I see also now the emerging evangelical Ukrainian public theology. It's really amazing, and I'm very happy to contribute to that as well. That's why they hired me, in the seminary, in the Evangelical Seminary in Kyiv, because they want to develop this sort of, for example, now we are developing together with them the theology of citizenship in the Evangelical Seminary, which is very promising. I'm very happy to contribute, and I very much support, this effort of the Ukrainian evangelicals to develop their own vision of public theology.
Following up this questioning, I'm thinking of, I really like the way you outlined Ukrainian public theology. And you already mentioned something about how within or inside Ukraine, you have some others like some Catholics and evangelicals. But if we think of the wider Orthodox church in the world, and now having separated from under Moscow, can you see collaboration with other Orthodox communities, and also including Constantinople?
Yes.
More pan.
Certainly so. Yes, certainly so. Well, actually, I believe that nowadays the jurisdictional boundaries are not as important for ideas, for the circulation of ideas, as they used to be earlier. For example, a landmark event in the global orthodoxy was the Pan-Orthodox Council, which took place in Crete in 2016. It was like an effort to have another ecumenical council. It did not work well, did not work as it was intended, but it was a nice try. Anyways, and this council did not produce, even though it wanted to produce a sort of social doctrine of the Orthodox Church, but it failed to produce. Instead, the Ecumenical Patriarchate came up with this idea of producing a jurisdictional kind of only Constantinopolitan social doctrine, which is called For the Light of the World. It's a beautiful doctrine developed mostly by the American Orthodox theologians from Fordham University and and elsewhere. And it's an excellent document. It has been translated to Russian, Ukrainian, was very well received in Ukraine, you know, and really contributed to this process of, you know, elaborating upon the Orthodox public theology, not just Ukrainian public theology, but Orthodox public theology. And I think it is happening. Other churches contribute to that, like, for example, I don't know, the Church of Greece, the Church of Finland, those churches who have a very strong experience of democratic societies. They understand democracy, they understand how democracy works, they contribute very well to this Orthodox public theology. When I speak about the Ukrainian public theology, it's a bit of kind of reduction, of course, because it's, well, I believe it is essentially an Orthodox public theology, but it's Ukrainian because it takes some experiences from the Ukrainian recent history, particularly the Maidans and this war, because it's a very special experience that people don't have. They cannot imagine how it is, you know, to be in the war. They can understand from outside, but it's very different from how you see it from inside. And this kind of outlook from inside at the public theology, which the Ukrainians have, helped them to make this contribution to the public theology, but it is concurrent with the with this larger picture of the formation of the Orthodox public theology that I mentioned.
Yeah, good. Thank you. I'm afraid that we will need to close, but I think I will ask one last question. Perhaps it's $1 million question. How would you critique, or how do you reflect on the recent U.S. administration's approach to the peace building? And if you are given authority to mediate this, how would you say how to deal with this complex situation?
Yeah. Well, it's an excellent and a very difficult and a dangerous question. But I decided for myself, I don't care. If they don't allow me to come back to this country, I just give up. No problem. This peace building process, which is as it is advocated and promoted by Trump's administration, I believe, it lacks, it is good generally in its intention. We all want peace, no doubt. And the question is that what kind of peace we want, and on which premises this peace should be achieved. We in Ukraine, we really stand for a formula which we call a just and sustainable peace. So it can be both just and sustainable. It cannot be just a ceasefire, and it cannot be on the kind of way getting rid of justice altogether. What we see as a part of the efforts of Trump's administration, first, it's mostly ceasefire that they want to achieve, and basically, well, it's a speculation, I know, but I believe that Trump's intention is that to achieve peace that would last under his patronage as long as he stays in power, in order for him to keep staying in power, saying, if you want peace, keep me in power. This is a speculation, but this speculation I conclude from, you know, from some ideas that come from the White House. And another thing is that it doesn't seem to be just, because justice is almost forgotten now. No one cares about justice. I mean, from those who promote this peace. Justice is completely neglected. No one talks about it. They close down, like the process of, for example, investigation to Russian crimes and into kidnapped Ukrainian children and so forth. And we don't see that it is really, it really matters at all for Trump's administration. I mean, justice to those who were killed, who were wounded, and so forth. And the third thing, which is problematic for me in these initiatives, is the neglection of agency, of Ukrainian agency. From the perspective of this administration, there are only big players like China, Russia, and the US. Others, they are just pawns, you know, they don't have their own agency. They should just follow, listen to what the big guys say, including Ukraine. And this is impossible for Ukraine. I think we won a possibility of being really the actors of our agency to be kind of taken into consideration, respected. At least we will not give up on our agency. Whatever they agree, I mean, the big guys in the Kremlin, in the White House, if they doesn't fit us, doesn't kind of violate, if it violates our agency and justice, we will just not accept it. And we are very much aware that we have all right to say no if our agency justice are ignored. And this is a part of our public theology now.
Yeah, right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you for coming. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.